I'm Mark Oliver with the National Shooting Sports Foundation, and today we're fortunate to visit with Senator Kelly Ayotte of New Hampshire. We're up at New England Upland in Hillsborough, New Hampshire, an NSSF member. Today we're going to be discussing a little bit about the process of Judge Kavanagh going up for confirmation very shortly. We're going to be able to discuss what that's going to mean to the firearms industry, what that means to gun owners, and our ability to exercise our constitutional rights. And get your perspectives from your experience of having been a Sherpa for Justice Gorsuch.
Yes.
So I guess the first question is, what is the role of a Sherpa?
Yeah, so a Sherpa is really someone who is assigned as a liaison to the nominee from usually the White House reaches out to that person. It's often a former senator because your job is to help the Supreme Court nominee through the confirmation process in the Senate, and then also help prepare him or her for the judiciary hearings. And you basically become that person's point person to help them through the process.
Great. So it's a very descriptive term, Sherpa.
Yes.
It brings up the climbing of the Himalayas, and how much does that actually relate to climbing up Capitol Hill and trekking this person through?
I think the term actually works pretty well for it because you know, when there's usually a Supreme Court nomination, as you know, there often can be a lot of partisan bickering. You never know how it's going to be. And here's usually the person who's nominated has not had any experience on Capitol Hill. And so having to go through and liaise in some way with 100 senators and to understand the confirmation process, and there is a hill on Capitol Hill, but sometimes the confirmation process can be difficult. And so I think Sherpa is a perfect name for it. I don't know who came up with it, but it makes sense.
Sure. So in your experience with Justice Gorsuch, you spent quite a bit of time with him, getting him ready,
Yes.
getting him prepared, and being able to introduce him to all the senators on Capitol Hill.
Right.
How much do you get to know, as the Sherpa for the justice, how much do you get to know this person?
Well, that's actually one of the really cool things about being the Sherpa. I got to know Justice Gorsuch really well. And we spent a ton of time together. You know, we did so many meetings. I think we did like over 70 meetings in the end. Hours and hours of preparing for the process and the hearings. And we just became really good friends. So that is a great privilege of the Sherpa. And I can tell you, Justice Gorsuch is a wonderful guy. You know, I got to meet his wife and his former clerks and his other friends. So as a Sherpa, it has to be someone that the nominee trusts. Mm-hmm. And I would say probably in most instances, they become pretty good friends.
Good. What is the difficulty of having to help this nominee navigate 100 different personalities in the Senate who have very competing interests? Describe to me, if you could, that process.
So this is difficult in the sense that I'll give Justice Gorsuch as an example, and I think similar to Judge Kavanagh. You know, he had spent 10 years on the 10th Circuit. Judge Kavanagh spent 12 years on the DC Circuit. He did work for the Bush administration, but he's been a judge for over a decade. And the life of a judge is one where you're not political and you actually should not be and shouldn't have to deal with any of the politics or politicians. And so I think that process, just helping the nominee and helping the potential Supreme Court justice understand what each of the senators may be interested in, who, you know, frankly, sometimes you got to tell them and talk to them about who's actually going to seriously sit down and listen with you and who's maybe just going to be in it for some kind of partisan points or things like that. That's, I think, giving him or her really good advice is important. And so that's a lot of what you do as the Sherpa. And so having served in the Senate myself and, you know, knowing a lot of the players, that's where I could help give Justice Gorsuch some insight.
And looking at that experience from your time in the Senate to now seeing that President Trump has been able to nominate 2 Supreme Court nominees in a very short period of time, has that process changed? Has it evolving? What is Senator Kyl having to go through right now?
Yeah, so by the way, I know Senator Kyl. I serve with him. He is a terrific guy, so I'm thrilled to see him be the Sherpa for Judge Kavanagh, so he's in great hands. And so what Senator Kyl and what Judge Kavanagh are going through right now, things have changed. And what happened is, I just want to give you a little history on this. When I was in the Senate, Harry Reid was the majority leader, and he essentially changed the Senate rules to get Circuit Court of Appeals judges through with just a majority instead of a 60 vote threshold, which had been the vote threshold before that under the rules. And frankly, unfortunately, I think he did it for reasons of just trying to push through judges for the DC Circuit and trying to uphold a lot of the Obama regulations.
Sure.
And so what happened is when Justice Gorsuch was nominated, we had so many meetings with Republicans and Democrats. He was so qualified. We went into this, really hoping to get over the 60 votes. And unfortunately, the Democrats just dug their heels in and blocked him. And so the Republicans then had to change the Supreme Court justice votes to a majority too. And they weren't really left with any choice there, because if you couldn't confirm someone as qualified as Justice Gorsuch with over 60 votes, then there's no one the president was going to nominate that they were going to be willing to give a fair shake to, unfortunately.
Yeah. So preparing for this, did you have a chance to speak with Senator Kyl as he was getting ready to take on this role with Judge Kavanagh?
I have talked to Senator Kyl.
Any words of advice?
I'm not going to presume to give advice to Senator Kyl, who was just a really experienced, great senator. So he did ask me for some advice, and he was really gracious, but he really doesn't need any advice. He knows what he's doing. He has great relationships with senators on both sides of the aisle, which is very important as the Sherpa, because you've got to go into Senate offices and introduce the judge to the senators. And so the ability to walk into the Senate offices and be treated with respect by both sides of the aisle, that certainly happened to me. I know that is how Senator Kyl will be treated. And the other thing that I think Senator Kyl will really be focused on is making sure that the senators that are really the swing senators, the ones that are taking this very seriously and trying to decide what they're going to do, that he will make sure that Judge Kavanagh answers all their questions and gets them all the information that they need on both sides of the aisle.
Sure. You've spoken before about this process with some other media, and you've explained that this is a process where the justices should really be insulated from the politics of the fight.
Yes.
How much of that colors this decision, this confirmation process, and how much of it is really an injustice to the judge?
Yeah, I mean, one of the hard things is that some of the meetings that you're in with the nominee, and I experienced this with Justice Gorsuch, where in some offices you'll go in and immediately the senator, and I'm going to call someone out on this, but for example, Senator Chuck Schumer his meeting with Justice Gorsuch, you could tell he already had a conclusion in mind. He was trying to get Justice Gorsuch to answer questions that, under his oath as a judge, he cannot prejudge cases. Mm-hmm. He cannot tell the senators how he's going to rule on a case, because that would prejudice the case going forward. And that's not just something that Justice Gorsuch had in mind, or Judge Kavanagh, but this is, Justice Ginsburg and other nominees from the other side of the aisle. But sometimes senators will try to push on areas that they know the judge can't answer, and that's unfortunate, because I think it's really important that our judges, that they are independent, that they're going to look at things and give cases the fair shake the first time, and not pre-decide anything. And that's why they can't answer these questions on how they would rule on something in advance.
Aside from some of the very hard political decisions like that, could you give us a peek of what some of the other conversations are like when in those Senate offices? What are the senators trying to learn about the judge?
So one side of this, we talk about the law, we talk about the cases, but there's a huge personal connection here. So the senators will often just be trying to get a sense of the person. And so asking you about family, hobbies, experiences that are beyond serving as a judge or whatever their professional background is. And so that's kind of a cool part of it, because you learn a lot about the nominee, but also about the other senators, because personal stories come up. I remember actually there was an exchange between Justice Gorsuch and Dianne Feinstein, of all people, who about like riding horses and things, something that they had in common. Now, she didn't vote for him, as you can imagine, but there is personal exchanges that occur. in those kinds of meetings in the Senate.
So,
and by the way, I got another fun one.
Please.
So it's also neat to see some of the interactions with the judge and some of the senators. Like, for example, Mike Lee, who is really a constitutional scholar himself and clerked at the U.S. Supreme Court. Like, I kind of felt like Mike Lee and Justice Gorsuch, like they were talking on another whole level, right? And those conversations are really fun too, because both of them were so steeped in constitutional law that it was just really fun to watch the two of these really smart people going back and forth.
Yeah. So Judge Kavanagh has been described, much like Justice Gorsuch and the late Justice Antonin Scalia, as an originalist. What does that mean, especially in the mind of a senator?
Yeah, so I think the originalist, it means, to me at least, is, if you think about originalism or textualism, it's actually following the law as it is written, and following the Constitution as it is written and how it was written by our founding fathers. To me, that's really important, because what I would not like to see as a Supreme Court justice is someone who writes the Constitution as they believe it should be, or the laws as they believe they should be, because that's not the role of a judge. The judge is supposed to be the independent judge on what the language of the Constitution says, and also what the laws say, because the legislature is there, the people are there to make the laws, not the judges. And so to me, when I think about originalism, it's really important, in my view, that we have judges that have that type of perspective, because it means that they are humble, that they respect their role under the separation of powers, and they respect the words of our Constitution as it was drafted. To me, it's common sense, right? That you would follow the Constitution as it was drafted and not make things up in the Constitution.
Sure. As a senator, you had the opportunity, of course, to vote on many judicial nominees and had to consider what the possibilities were for a Supreme Court justice prior to even you taking up Justice Gorsuch.
Right.
What were some of the things that you wanted to see out of the judges that we're putting on the benches?
Well, I have to say, I never had the opportunity to vote on a Supreme Court justice, but having now been the Sherpa for one, I would like a justice like Justice Gorsuch, because not only did I have a chance to read his jurisprudence on the 10th Circuit and now see his cases on the Supreme Court, but also to get to know him personally and to understand how thoughtful, how smart, how much he does his homework, what an excellent writer he is. And to me, those are all the factors, and what's their judicial philosophy? Again, getting back to this issue of, we can't ask for a judge that's going to decide the cases how we like them all the time.
Sure.
That's not our role. But what we can ask is a judge that's going to follow the law, going to follow the Constitution as it is drafted, and really respect the separation of powers as reflected in our Constitution. And to me, that's really the framework for an excellent Supreme Court justice, and that's why I cite Justice Gorsuch, having worked with him so closely. And as I look at the nomination of Judge Kavanagh and his background and how he's conducted himself on the D.C. Circuit, I'm confident that he's going to be in that mold as well.
You spoke earlier a little bit about the importance of the personal connection in meeting with the senators. We saw when President Trump introduced Judge Kavanagh, his family was right there beside him.
Exactly.
And obviously when we got to know Justice Gorsuch, there was pictures of him fishing with
Justice
Justice
he's
Scalia.
a big outdoors person.
How important?
Skier, which I love.
So how important is that not only do the senators, but the American public get to see the judge and the justice behind the robe?
Well, I think it's important for the American public to understand that our judges, just like our elected leaders, we're people too. And what kind of person are you electing? What kind of person are you putting on the Supreme Court for life? So not just their judicial philosophy, but it's nice to know that people like Justice Gorsuch and Judge Kavanagh, that they're good people in their community, they're respected in their communities, that they're really family men, that are respectful of how they treat people. Because what happens in a court case is that people come before the court from all different backgrounds. And having someone who is respectful and who is a good person, who is going to give each person that comes before them in that court really making sure that the law is enforced fairly for each person. That's why their background matters.
Yeah. Again, Senator Ayotte, thank you so much for spending time with us today, being able to explain the process of what Judge Kavanagh is going to have to go through here shortly, and your support for the firearms industry. Thank you.
Well, thank you, and I really appreciate the National Shooting Sports Foundation and really your respect and support for people's constitutional rights.
Thank you.